The word we've been in Mark chapter 4 all week, and I want to go back there um, again, not reading the entire story of the woman with the issue of blood and Jairus' in his daughter. I don't think we'll read all that. To a lot of you, it may be familiar. We study that, teach that fairly often. But one of the things I'm teaching on Sunday morning is about the prayer of faith, different kinds of prayer, different types of prayer. Breaking those down is not required. You don't have to pull out the file of prayer of faith in order, or only interceding now. It's not that compartmentalized, but it does help for some. At least for me, it helped me to understand the differences. Just getting a little more as you grow in your ability to pray effectively, understanding the difference in intercession and also the combination of the prayer of faith. And once I have spent time in thanksgiving and praise, and I've prayed or spent time in dedication and consecration, if I build on those, I'm going to be better at intercession. If those aren't taken care of, now, I don't think you have to do that every time before. If you build that into your life as a habit and as a way of life, your response or your heart and all those things are already in place. I think that's as much as anything the reason that Jesus identified those different types and different things in the model prayer when he was teaching them how to pray. When the disciples asked him over in Matthew chapter 6, and I believe it's Luke 11, where it talks about those things, the Lord's Prayer, that is. He brings them a way to pray, a model for prayer, not just something to say. And we drive that point home a lot. But over here in Mark chapter 4, we see as the example. Now, I got caught up in emphasizing or looking at all that was going on in this as Mark is relating this story. And he gathered this information from Peter. He wasn't there. Mark wasn't. But Peter was, and Mark came along later and was writing down and telling. Really, most people believe it was Peter's stories. It was the way that Peter related it, and then it parallels some of the other gospels as well. But this woman, this leader of the synagogue, and this woman, what was taking place in the beginning of Jesus' ministry is his fame was spreading. And it's interesting that most of the time in the beginning, he would catch people, and after they were healed or delivered, he'd say, okay, don't tell people, don't talk about this. Now, he's not saying, I want you to keep it a secret. He's saying that really, if he told them to tell no one, he probably knew they were still going to tell a few, and you know how that goes. Oh, I won't tell anybody, but then you tell your best friend, or you tell your spouse, or you tell somebody, and then they only tell one. And then pretty soon it's cat's out of the bag, and it's everywhere. And that's what took place with Jesus, to the point that he couldn't even hardly function. He had no life of privacy at all, unless he got up in the early hours of the morning and would go out away. And obviously he didn't want to be alone. He didn't want to not have connection with people. That's why he came. And in fact, I'm trying to think where I saw that and in which Bible. I was reading 2 or 3 different Bibles here. But as Jesus, as one of the places here, it said that's why he came. I mean, he came to minister to people, to connect with people, and to minister to them. So I know I saw that at one point because I wrote a bunch of notes down from it, but I covered about 3 or 4 chapters in my study this morning. Let's go though to Mark chapter 4, verse 21. No, verse 26. Sorry. No, I'm in chapter 4. That's why we got to be. That's the problem. Yes, verse 21. Mark 5:21. Jesus got into the boat again and went back to the other side of the lake, where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Now, something that stuck out in my mind that I haven't always noted in reference to this scripture and this account of Jesus' life was that he's going back and forth across the Sea of Galilee. I wrote down here, notice the setting and what was going on. Jesus kept going to different places to meet with different people. Their best mode of transportation, fastest mode of transportation, was the boat, and especially to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is not a huge mass of water, but it's a large lake. I don't know how many acres. I need to Google that and see how many acres the Sea of Galilee is, or how many miles across. I think it's 4 or 5 miles across. So good-sized lake. They call it the Sea of Galilee. But it would have, it would have been impossible for him to have walked around it every time because of time, but also because of the crowds of people. The more people that found out about him, the more people wanted him. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today in a little bit of length here is in verse 22. It says, "Then the leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived. And when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him, 'My little daughter is dying. Please come lay your hands on her and so that she can live, and heal her so that she can live.'" Now, the thing that stood out that I don't always emphasize, in fact, I don't know that I've said it exactly like this before, is that in this moment, he has faith, and that's what I've always brought attention to. He came to Jesus knowing Jesus could, if he would, and he came to Jesus with a specific request and a specific prayer of faith, but also declaring what would happen. Those are all elements of a prayer of faith, that we know who our source is, Jesus. We know his will and his desire to heal, and we set our faith for how, according to what he has done and according to his will. Obviously, it's we're not telling God in a prayer of faith, telling God what to do, but we're declaring over that situation. Now, Jesus could have said in that moment, like he did other places, "It's done." But see, Jairus had set in motion his faith and that process to say, "Come lay your hands on her and she'll live." Now, the other places, they just came to him, "Here's my need," and Jesus determined how. I don't want to get into the specifics of that, but I do want you to see there was something that I have missed or have not emphasized, and that was Jairus' desperation. He was desperate. He came and he fell at his feet. Now, this is a man who had a position, he had a name, he had notoriety, could have, not saying he did, but could have had pride, probably had pride to some degree. And some of that wouldn't have been an issue because he was a person of position. Pride wouldn't have been a problem for him to say, "Yes, I'm Jairus." But if it became an issue of, "I'm not laying at that guy's feet," I'm not. He's taking away from what my position. None of that mattered. 100% committed to getting to Jesus, the one, because he was desperate. He had no other. He had no other recourse. He had no other way, no other thing. I'm sure, had tried. It doesn't say, but I'm sure they'd tried. I'm sure they'd called the doctor. I'm sure they'd done whatever. But he said, my daughter is at the point of death. Out of the ESV, it says, then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live. Now, it says the same thing in over here. It's a little different wording. But verse 24 says, and he went with him. Jesus went with him. Now, we also know that in this story, I say we know, if you've read this story before, and we've talked about it lots of times, there was also a woman, and there was also a crowd. There was also his disciples. All these elements, all these people are here in this place. It says, Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. And a woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years and with constant bleeding. She suffered suffered a great deal from many doctors. And over the years, she'd spent everything she had, and she paid to pay them, but she had gotten no better. In fact, she'd gotten worse. Now, here was another person who was desperate. They had no hope. They had no ability in themselves. They'd exhausted everything else. Jairus was desperate, and it brought him to a point of not worrying about, not letting pride, not looking at his reputation, not looking at any of those things. See, I think something that needs to be said right here is, are we limiting God's power? Can we limit God's power in our life? I'm careful how I say this. Because we're worried about what are people going to think. You know, there's some of you sitting in a situation right now, and I don't know who this is for. I'm not thinking of anybody in particular. But there's some of you sitting in a position, sitting in a church, or sitting in a friend group, or you're in a place, and you know God's telling you to move, to shift, to change, to step out, to do something different. But you're worried about what people are going to think, or you're worried about what they're going to say, or you're worried about how that would look. And I'll just say this: how desperate are you? How hungry are you? How in pursuit of God are you? And see, to me, this starts with in small areas. And this starts with you being willing to say, you know what, I don't care what people think. I'm not going to and a lot of things, I'm not going to be held back by anything else. And it starts in small areas. Will you get up when you need to get up? Will you pray and stop? Will you shut off the TV? Will you will you do the things? Will you if we'll do it in small things, then when it comes to the big things, we don't have to get as much to a point of desperation. But he refused. Now, the woman was the same thing. Verse 27 says she had heard about Jesus. So she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe, for she thought to herself, or she had said, out of the ESV and the King James, New King James, it says, for she said. Where'd she say it? In her mind. That's why they say, well, for she thought. She formulated, she thought it, therefore she formed the words in her mind, in her thoughts, probably even whispered them under her breath. She probably, she didn't have to boldly proclaim, if I may touch the hem of his garment and get a thee and the thou in there. Thouest garment, I'm just having a little fun there. If I touch even his garment, she didn't, at least in this, and the ESV is trying to take literal word for word. This is thought for thought and sometimes word for word. Different translations using different ways of approaching it. If I can even touch his garment, in other words, he doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't even have to know I'm there. All I have to do is touch his garment. Because why? She had heard about Jesus and she knew he was her source of hope, source of help. I will be healed. So she said, if her only question was whether or not she could get there. Jairus' only question was, if you're willing to come. Their faith had been settled. Why? Because they'd heard what Jesus had provided and done for others. And they had determined in their heart through hearing of the word, seeing what Jesus had done, and through setting their faith. Now, all they had to do was remove that one condition that would have limited. They'd removed everything else. Jairus said, I'm not going to let pride, I'm not going to let my position, I'm not going to let what people think, because a man in his position shouldn't be out there groveling at the feet of this carpenter's son. That's what his contemporaries, that's what his buddies were going to think. That's what probably, I don't know this, but I mean, maybe even some of his family, maybe his wife. I don't know how old he was. Maybe he had children. Maybe they're all going to go, Dad, what are you doing? He didn't care. All that went out the window. And I can tell you that sometimes we need to develop, and I don't think bad things have to happen for us to be that desperate. But we can ask ourselves, are we hungry for God? Do we want God in his presence? If you've never experienced that, begin to pursue that. If you've experienced it but not lately, I mean, I don't want to not experience God. I'm not going to sit in a place. I'm not going to be around people that are refusing or hindering me or keeping me from getting that place I want to be. Man, that's good stuff. If I can just touch his robe, I'll be healed. Immediately the bleeding stopped and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of this terrible condition. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out of him. That is so critical to this story. Is he sensed, even though there's all these people touching him, there was a force, a flow of the power of God went out of him. Why? Because somebody with faith had determined, had said, had been desperate, but had pressed through. And that's a big part of this. Pressed through. See, some people, they say, well, God heal me, but God asks for something. Or it requires a pressing into God's presence. It requires a little extra time. It requires getting up earlier, or it requires adjusting something. God's waiting to meet you, but there's a crowd around him and you can't quite get there under normal circumstances. Are you willing to press a little more? See, I guarantee you, if we can be distracted, if we can be held back, we will be. So don't determine that you can't be. You won't be. That's what she did. The crowd said, I'm sure they were like, get off me, woman. And they didn't know what her condition was, because in her condition, she wasn't supposed to be in the crowd anyway. But I'm sure that they're like, I'm getting here. So the strongest but she determined, I'm not going to let anything keep me from it. And same way with Jairus. That's two things. That's the two people that are in this. This is what the Lord was ministering this to me in this story, and I've ministered this many different ways. And all of the elements of everything are in this story. It goes on. She's healed at once. He feels the power. He says, "Who touched my clothes?" And the disciple said, "What are you talking about, Jesus? Everybody's touching you." But he looked around for who it was, and he saw her, and she realized what had happened to her. She came and fell at his knees in front of him and told him what she had done. He said, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." Go in peace. Your suffering is over. Now, faith said, if I can just touch his clothes. The only question was, can I get there? And but she received it. Now, Jesus told her something in those words in the original text. It would be explained as, go and be and continue in what you have. In other words, you're going to have to maintain it. The same faith that got you there is going to carry you through when you think the symptoms are coming back, when people tell you, "Oh, that can't be." Oh, what? There's going to be all these things, and he says, "Go in peace, continue in, being healed," is what how it would have read out of the original text. Now I gotta wrap this up. I know I'm way over time, but he says, "Why?" He was still speaking to the messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, and they told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now." But Jesus overheard them. Aren't you glad if you understand this story? And he said to Jairus, he turned to him, and I just have this picture of when he overheard that. He's talking to the woman, and over here there's a conversation, and he hears that, and I think he just snapped around. And I think he grabbed Jairus, and he drew him in, and he said, "You stand on your faith." He said, "Don't be afraid. Don't let fear enter. Don't let doubt in. Don't let any of these emotions rule you." He said, "Only believe. Don't be afraid. Just have faith." Then Jesus stopped the crowd and wouldn't let them go any further except Peter, James, and John. He drew the ones that he needed to teach, but he also drew the ones that he knew would stand with him and not contribute to the doubt, the fear, the unbelief. It was he shut them all out, and then he went in and he healed her. When they came to home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw the commotion, the weeping, the wailing, and he went inside and he says, "Why is all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead, but she's only sleeping." And they laughed at him. Jairus was desperate. He set his faith. And Jesus said, just because a bad report came in, keep standing on what you believe for. In other words, Jesus didn't leave. Jesus didn't shift or change. Jesus wasn't moved by what he heard in that report. And he walked in and he healed her. Now, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of teaching right there. But I trust that you're hearing these things for you. What part of that in that story are you needing to hear? Are you needing to just hear more and more so that faith arises? Like the woman, she heard of him. They didn't say that Jairus did, but you know that he did too. Jesus was moving from place to place, crossing the Sea of Galilee, going from one place to another, so that he could be physically there, which he had to be at that time. But now, all of those things, all the ministry of Jesus is still at work in the earth. If you're in a place that teaches or says, well, all that ceased, man, run. Go someplace where you can hear that God still heals, delivers, sets the captive free, that the power of God is still available to meet every piece and part of every need that you have. And faith, the faith required to walk that out comes right here from this word. Man, I got to get out of here and let you guys go get to work. But just put your faith in God today. Trust Him, and be willing to fall before Jesus and say, and with whatever it is, if your issue is, start with you, the best one you can control, really the only one you can control, and we have authority to control, is ourselves, and guide and direct and keep ourselves, and operate and walk as Jesus would. Listen, I got to get going, but let y'all go. But man, go out today